another episode of the Piano Pedagogy podcast. I'm Jacqueline Beckoff, and I own a successful piano studio in Southern California. And with me, as always, is Arianne, who also owns a successful piano studio in Southern California. Our two topics today are memorization and then some syllabuses for different programs here in California. How's things going, Arianne?
You know, I can't complain. Things are going fine here. And I'm ready to dive into the discussion about memorization and syllabi. You know, the studio's been growing over here, so that's nice. How's your studio going?
That's awesome. This last week, I had my adult studio workshop, and I tackled a pretty deep topic. I tackled musical performance anxiety. I did it was probably about a 25-minute talk about musical performance anxiety, and it was a pretty deep subject, right? It's a pretty heavy subject.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it's been good getting that topic out in the open with students and hearing what they have to say about how they're experiencing things, and I think it's important for people to know that they're not alone, right? They're not the only people that experience it. The statistics for it are pretty wild. 60 to 80% of professional musicians experience some degree of musical performance anxiety, and 20% of music students that drop out cite musical performance anxiety as being the reason they dropped out of college for those music programs.
Wow. It's pretty significant.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy, yeah. So I don't remember who started last week. I think it was you. Was it you?
I think it was.
So I'll start today. I'll start and we'll talk about some memorization. So memorization is a pretty it's a pretty esoteric subject, because so many teachers just they were taught, or they weren't really taught memorization. They were just told that it's something that they need to do, and then that's how they kind of pass it on to their students, right? It's not really something that we taught. I wasn't really taught as a child how to memorize. I was just given the expectation that this music needs to be memorized, and then I kind of went home and just played it a lot. What about you, Arianne? When you were a child, did they teach you, did your teachers teach memorization?
Not really. I think I had this issue where my sight reading skills were so lacking that I relied on memorization for survival in my piano lessons. And so memorization was one of those things for me that my teachers were always trying to wean me off of. So
interesting. That's good. That's interesting.
Story, but some of my students do that too.
And then when it came time, when your music started getting more challenging, did you find it difficult to memorize it, or was that just something that's always come easy to you?
Yeah, there were some difficulties, especially when the pieces were long, or if they didn't follow strict patterns that I could instantly recognize. And then for me, it was the only guidance I really received was, hey, you got to just drill this, just practice it over and over while sight reading until you can do it without the book.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's interesting because at the elementary level, at the very basic level, memorization is rather easy, because when your students are playing 8-measure long pieces and they're preparing that for a recital, it's incredibly easy for them to just use rote memorization at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And it's so tempting to just let that be the only thing, because then you can just focus on other things. You don't have to spend time on memorization, because they don't need it. But if we only start to cover memorization techniques when music gets complicated, then our students are kind of in trouble. It would be like only covering notation once it gets complicated, right? So I think it's really important to cover that from the early stages, even when the music is so simple that it doesn't really necessitate memorization strategies, because we don't want to wait until later when they're in over their head, right?
Yeah.
The memorization stuff that I'm talking about today is heavily based off of a lecture given by Professor Allison Edwards at Cal State University at Fullerton in 2018. I've added on to some of this stuff, but credit where credit's due. She had a lot to do with this here. So the first thing that we need to acknowledge when we're talking about memorization is that it is something that needs to be taught, right? It isn't something that we can get away with just sending our students home and be like, memorize this, right? We need to help them understand how to do it. So to understand how to do it, we need to break memory down into all of the different types of memory. Let's see if we can come up with that list here, Arianne. So I always like to start off this list with the two that don't count because they don't apply to us, and it really gets a smile out of little kids. The two that don't matter for us here at the piano is taste and smell. Hopefully they're not smelling my piano, and please don't take a bite out of my piano. Those are the two freebies that I give students. Any ideas for some of the other types that do apply to us, Arianne?
Visual and oral.
Absolutely, visual and oral. 3 more to go.
Muscle memory.
Yes, that is rote memory. 2 more.
Help me out here. I don't know.
Kinesthetic, which is the way something feels. It's a little bit different than rote memory. And the last one is analytical memory. So we'll start down there at the end with analytical memory. Analytical memory is our ability to manipulate pieces of information that we have committed to memory. So an example of this is, being able to like from a list of dates, being able to only spit out some of that information. Like if you know all of the presidents and which party they were from and when they were elected, being able to list out all of the Democrats or all of the Whig Party or whatever they were back then, right? So being able to manipulate pieces of information is analytical memory. Next up on that list was kinesthetic. This is the feeling of playing the piano. It's a little bit different than muscle memory or rote memory because rote memory, we're not really focused on, well, anything, right? We're just trying to get it into some sort of like unconscious memory where our fingers kind of know what's happening, which is rote memory, right? So rote memory is that sensation of doing something so many times that you know how to do it in your sleep. But if someone asked you to explain it to them, you would probably have a pretty difficult time with that because you just know step A to step B to step C to step D. And if anything happens at any point in any of those steps, you are in deep trouble. And then oral memory or our hearing memory is pretty self-explanatory, as is the visual memory. So typically when I explain this stuff to a student, depending on the age group, I might use seeing instead of visual, hearing instead of oral, doing instead of rote, feeling for kinesthetic, and then thinking for analytical. I think generally when a student becomes a teenager, I'll make the switch over to the more fancy words. But out of this list, I will immediately cross off rote memory. I will immediately cross off rote memory and explain that rote memory is not something that we actively want to practice, and that it is a really cool type of memory because it's really cool to do something just kind of automatically, but that it has a pretty significant downfall, right? That the pretty significant weakness that it has is that if you make a mistake, it's pretty difficult to get back on track. It's pretty difficult to get back on track. The example that I like to give is tying our shoes, right? Everybody knows how to tie their shoes, but can we tie our shoes after we get distracted halfway through, right? Because for me personally, if I'm tying my shoes and I get distracted and I put down my shoelaces halfway through tying my shoes, I have to start over. What about you, Arianne? Do you have to start over?
It definitely takes me a minute to kind of look down and see what part of the shoelace tying process I'm in. If not, yeah, completely start over also.
It's pretty weird. It's a pretty weird thing, right? So, when we explain this, this is something that most kids know how to do, and because they aren't as practiced on tying their shoes, they haven't been tying shoes for quite as many years as we have. They'll pretty much just say, "Yeah, I'd have to start it over again," and I'd say, so like if you're playing your piece and something like that happens, what would happen, and they say, well, I have to start over again. So we immediately cross wrote off of that list, or doing for the little kids. And then I put a star next to the thinking or the analytical memory, and I say, this is the most important kind of memory that we have, right? We absolutely want to be thinking about our music and using our brains when we're doing it, right? For the older students, I'll say that this is the advantage we have over younger kids. Younger kids can just soak up information, but as adults or as teenagers, we have logical reasoning skills that the younger children lack. And analytical memory is things like being able to recall the chords, right? Being able to recall the chords, and then memorizing your music based off of which chord is in which place, or being able to split your music up into little sections and starting at each of those little sections. So analytical memory is the one that I put a star by, and everybody is always going to use analytical memory. And that leaves the three remaining: visual, oral, and kinesthetic. From this list, I have my students pick two. I have my students pick two of them. Generally, they'll pick one that they really like, and then they'll pick the one that they dislike the least out of the remaining two. So for visual memory, some people have really good visual memory. Obviously, some people have photographic memories. I've never taught someone with a photographic memory. Have you?
No, but I have taught quite a few students with perfect pitch while I do not have perfect pitch.
What's that experience like?
Oh my gosh, it's like they know what I'm going to say before I even say it. It's a pleasure. It could also be a hindrance at times if the student is young enough that they can feel frustrated at their teacher singing something in the wrong key. Or
oh my gosh, I would feel so self-conscious.
Yeah. It's a blessing and maybe a curse.
But visual memory is very much just how something looks, right? And the way that I practice this with students is I have them study a small section of their sheet music for 30 seconds. I give them a whiteboard. They close the book after those 30 seconds are over, and they try to write it down exactly the way it looks on the page. And some of my students that have mastered the visual memory, they think it's the coolest thing, because when they go up to perform, they say they can bring their sheet music with them, even though they don't have the book, because they can just see the sheet music itself when they close their eyes, or just in in their mind's eye. So that obviously has very obvious benefits, right? Being able to visualize the sheet music. Oral memory, again, it's like they have a recording of the music with them. They can just audiate that sound in their head, and as they're playing, they can just hear what's coming, right? Testing this one is pretty easy. I say I don't ever use the word sing. I don't have my students sing, because sing is a very loaded word for some people that they don't like. They don't think they're a good singer or whatnot. So I explain the word vocalize, which is singing for people who don't care about how good we are at singing. And then I'll do a vocalization just with syllables, laws, or whatever. I say that the three things that matter are up and down, not the pitch, but up and down rhythm, and stuff like dynamics and articulations. So being able to do the melody, being able to audiate the bass line for certain pieces, for a fugue, being able to sing each of the four parts independently of the others, that has massive memorization benefits. Mm-hmm. And then the kinesthetic memory, being able to play it somewhere other than the piano, where you don't have the sense, the feeling of the keys. You're just feeling the fingering. You're feeling moving your hands. Being able to float in midair and play. Being able to do it on a table. Being able to do it on your lap. Any of these places where you're playing it, but you're not playing it on the piano, right? Takes it completely out. You no longer have the sound to help guide you. You no longer have the visual of the piano to help guide you. You're now doing this based off of your feeling, right? And students will gravitate towards one of these three more than the other two. And that's the one that they prefer, but we always want to reinforce one of the other two as well, to give them more types of memory. Because when we have memory slips, it's generally one of our types of memory. We might forget where our hand goes to, but if we also have a visual memory, we can see where our hand needs to go to. If we have an oral memory and we're having a blank on what the next measures look like, but we know what they sound like, again, that can be very useful for us. So diversifying our memory types is incredibly useful. And when something's like really high stakes, for example, if you're preparing for an audition, then you can do all 5 memory types. You can really make something bulletproof. So I'm curious how you teach memorization with your students, Arianne.
Well, I've learned a lot of insightful information just from listening to you talk about the different ways that you can teach memorization. My approach is a lot more oral focused, and it could be because it's just a blind spot of mine as someone who's an auditory learner myself. The way I usually teach memorization is I just have the student practice repeatedly until they can pretty much play the piece from memory. Another thing I'll do is I'll throw them into the deep end right after they have learned a piece and played it from start to finish, both hands, with all the necessary phrasing and dynamics. When they've gotten to that point where they can play it pretty well with the book there, I'll just out of the blue surprise them, catch them off guard with the, hey, close the book and see how far you can get kind of question. And usually students surprise themselves by being able to play farther than they predict they could. So it's a confidence boost. And I find that especially young students get excited to push themselves and see just how far they can go after a few attempts.
That's interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like for a lot of it, you've fallen back on some of the ways that your teachers in the past have explained things, or not failed, but did not clearly explain methods, right? So just having them practice it over and over again, which is for kids especially, it's the easiest way, right? Mm-hmm. Because it requires not a lot of thought for it, and it's certainly easy to teach. And I find that adult students also like to fall back on this because these methods, they can be very mentally taxing. When you're taking the piano away and you're having to create that sound in your head, that takes a great deal more focus and energy than it does to just play it over and over again. It's so tempting. I find it so tempting as well to just play it over and over again. But it's interesting because memorization, it's something we don't practice much. We don't really practice it much as pianists, right? How often do you have your students memorize music?
Well, whenever there's a performance that comes around, I have them memorize music, but typically, just week to week, not enough. Definitely not enough.
Yeah, it's a blind spot that we have because it's a skill that we use mostly for performance. And if our students only get a handful of performance opportunities every year, then they'll only get a handful of memorization practices. And by the time the next recital has rolls around, I mean, it's been 6 months since the previous one. So, I mean, do we even remember it? Do we remember these methods because we haven't used them?
Right.
Go ahead.
If you want this whatever piece to be memorized long term, let's say it's their very first fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier or something significant that could help them throughout their music career if they choose to go that route, or just throughout their lives as something that they can always fall back on that they like to play, then having a more analytical approach to the memorization process and a more all-encompassing approach could be better for the long term, even if something like repetition might be better in the short term for memorizing something. It's just going to be probably a little bit more easier to forget because we haven't used all these different ways of reinforcing what's been memorized.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, the having something long term is really important, especially as our students get more advanced. As we, as college students, we work on like 4 or 5 pieces in a 16-week period, right? College students work on like 4 or 5 pieces or even fewer, right? And as students' music get longer, it means that oftentimes they're making less they're moving on from less pieces, and it's a that means you even have even fewer opportunities to practice that skill of memorization. I mean, if you think about it, how often do our students practice something like articulations or reading music versus someone who's with a teacher for 5 years, right? We have a student for 5 years and say we have 2 recitals, that teacher has 2 recitals every year. That means they've only practiced memorizing music 10 times, right? 10 times over a 5-year period. Are there any other skills that we say are important that we practice so little, right? So one of the things that is awesome to do is to try to make memorization a more regular part of piano lessons, right? Making it more important. And a cute way to do this is for young children is to say that there's this very exclusive club that they can join, right? There's an exclusive club. And this club is called the AAA Club. Nothing to do with cars, but it's called the AAA Club. And the 3 A's stand for anywhere, anytime, and anyone. Anywhere, anytime, anyone. And in order to be in this club, you need to be able to play at least one piece, no matter where you are, as long as there's a piano, no matter when you're asked, and no matter who is asking. And in order to do that, you can't guarantee that you'll have your music with you all the time. So to join this very exclusive club, you need to have music memorized at all times in order to do this. And that means that at any point during that student's piano lesson, at any week, you can ask for any of the pieces on their AAA list. So it means they need to constantly be reinforcing this practice habit of keeping music memorized. And it's great for the more advanced students because as they're toiling on their latest etude or as they're banging their head against the wall of the this fugue, it's hard to feel like you're good at being a piano player sometimes, right? But if you have music that is impressive sounding and that you've perfected and that you can whip out when someone asks you to play something, or just for yourself, right? If you just need a reminder after a particularly rough Bach session that you do know what you're doing, you can play the last Chopin etude that you learned. You can play the last sonatina or sonata or whatever. So in order to help people keep that piece in tip-top shape, I have them create a set of cards, a AAA deck. And on each of those cards is the name of the piece and the name of one of the sections from that piece. And they analyze the musical form for all of their pieces. They create a card for each of those sections. And then all of the pieces on their AAA list get mixed up together. So they have the A section from their sonata, and then the C section from their etude, and then, the B section from Bach, all mixed up together. And
wow.
Every time they practice, they take the top card, they read what it says, they try to play that section from memory. If they can, they put it aside. And if they aren't able to get it on their first try, they might need to get out the book. They might need to practice it a little bit. After they've gotten it by memory, they put it to the back of the stack. And they're done practicing their memory for the day when there's no more cards left in their stack. So it is a regular part of my students' practice for them to continue working on their memorization. And their anxiety about playing from memory is way less, because it's no longer this thing that they associate purely with stressful performance opportunities, right? Like a recital. Recitals are fun, but there's definitely a level of stress to them, right? And if we associate memorization exclusively with this stressful thing that they do 1, 2, 3 times a year, then memorization will be very closely linked with that stress. So by uncoupling it from that, it is, it's no longer that stressful thing. The second piano lesson, my students are memorizing a piece to put on their AAA list. The very beginning, memorization is just, it's there. It's part of their life as a pianist. So it's not mysterious. It's not scary. It's just like all the other skills that we have. So,
that's impressive, to be able to say that, hey, you can memorize something even at the beginning level, right off the bat. That's very powerful. And the fact that it's not always associated with a high stakes event, that probably does wonders for the student.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because memorization is seen as this thing that we have to do. We've got to do this thing because it's tradition. We can blame Liszt, we can blame Clara Schumann for making us memorize our music, right? And now we have to do this. My teacher says I have to do it. I don't know why I can't just take my book up while I'm performing. And it changes from that to being, this is so cool. I know this piece so well. I don't need my book, right? I don't need my book to play this piece. I can just get engrossed in the music. I can just perform it there, and I don't need my book, right? No one asks me, can I bring my book up at the recital? Because no one needs to bring their book up at the recital, right? It's not they don't see it as something that they have to do. They see it as something that they get to do. They get to show off that memory skill, right? And that helps the musical performance anxiety so much, because this is one of the big sources of musical performance anxiety. Am I going to forget my entire piece? Am I going to sit down and am I going to know nothing, right? Am I going to look like a fool in front of everybody at the recital because it's all gone, right? And it changes from that to, it's just a natural part of how we play piano music. So,
how cool is that?
All right, so I think that's all I have for my topic. Any big takeaways, Arianne, before we head over to your topic?
Well, I'd say one thing that really stood out to me is, like I said, destroying that association of memorization with simply a high stakes event like a performance at a recital, etc. And also, I think that, for my visual learners out there, because there are visual learners in my studio for sure, and maybe, students who need to learn to be a little bit more analytical in their memorization process, etc. I can incorporate these activities that you outlined, such as, taking a moment to really look at the sheet music and then trying to rewrite it on your own somewhere else, like on a piece of manuscript paper. I think that could be very effective.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think the big thing I want all our listeners to take away from this is memorization is something that you do have to teach. And it is something that needs to be done more than just at recitals. However you choose to teach it, whether you put sticky notes on the page. I had a teacher who did that, one of my former teachers, she would incrementally just put sticky notes askew so that you would get one half of a note covered up on the page. And by the time you were done, you'd have sticky notes all over your page and you couldn't see any of your music anymore. However you're going to do it, however you're going to teach it, make sure that you teach a method or multiple methods and that you find a way to practice that method with your students more than just at recitals, more than just at recital time. All right, so you're talking about different syllabuses, is that right?
That's right. I'm going to be comparing and contrasting the Music Teachers Association of California syllabus today with the Royal Conservatory of Music syllabus, as well as the ABRSM syllabus here. I have excerpts from all three, and we'll just jump right into it.
For our listeners who may not be in the know, what are these syllabuses? What are they used for?
Okay, these are standardized syllabi of music performance, particularly piano performance for our purposes. Although these music teacher associations, of course, write syllabi for performance proficiency and success in other instruments as well. And what it is it's a way that, whoop, my battery, okay. It's a way that teachers in a region or even throughout the world can get their students on kind of some comparable footing with other students from other teachers and come together and have a standard of performance for each established level according to these associations and exams. So the Music Teacher Association of California specifically has an exam, a very well-known exam here called the Certificate of Merit exam. And what that entails is performance, the playing of scales, a theory test, etc. I have prepared students at my community music schools in the past for the CM, Certificate of Merit exam, but I haven't prepared students in my own studio for it as yet. And then these exams include performances of certain pieces. And we'll get into which syllabi allow you to pick your own, which syllabi provide a list, how much leeway there is, and how standardized each syllabus really is compared to the other.
Awesome. Yeah, these programs were something that I was never, none of my teachers as I was growing up used any of these programs. And I'm familiar with them, but it's not something that I personally do in my studio with my students. I've had parents inquire about it. And I explain that it's not something that I personally do. So have you had people ask you about it for your personal studio?
Definitely, yes. I get questions about it sometimes, particularly MTAC, because so many Californian piano students and teachers participate in CM. Fewer as of late, but before COVID and everything, I don't even want to get into that really, but before COVID.
Ooh, the drama. Yes, I've heard all about this drama.
Yeah, I mean, once it went online, a lot of people just didn't appreciate the process as much. It was very stressful for students to record so many different takes of the same piece over and over to feel like they were competitive.
Oh my gosh, I hate recording things. I was recording stuff for my recitals during COVID, recording my speaking parts. And as soon as you're recording and as soon as you set yourself up with this expectation, I can do this as many times as I need to in order for it to be perfect. It just becomes so much worse.
Yeah, it really brings out the perfectionism in most of us, and there's almost this unspoken expectation that, okay, now that you can record and take as many takes as you want, we have higher standards of performance now, because you're up against people who are willing to take as many takes as it takes. Take. instead of the one live performance that you used to have. I didn't grow up in the MTAC. That's mainly because I was in Nevada and my teacher did something similar, which was a Silver State competitions and Music Teacher National Association syllabi that I did some national exams with. So it's not exactly the same as the MTAC standards, but it was pretty similar. And yeah, I would say that while I was a student and now I appreciated going through those, jumping through those hoops and all, because I think I came out stronger for it, and I rose to the challenge, and I worked well under pressure. Otherwise, I felt lazy and unmotivated to put in the work to learn all these different things like scales, arpeggios, contrary motion, oral skills, etc. So you might find that for some students, even if you don't officially enter them into these things, or if you do, they might benefit from some of the syllabus material available out there. So let's get into it. First, we have the Music Teacher Association of California. And forgive me, my big printed syllabus, I think I loaned it to a friend, so it's not with me right now, but I do have some excerpts. And basically, my favorite part of the Music Teacher Association of California syllabus layout is that they have these handy little study guide cheat sheets throughout the syllabus for any given level. Right now I'm showing level 4. And it's like a table that tells you which scales need to be memorized, which ones might possibly be evaluated when you're a student who's going through this evaluation process. For example, if you are in level 4 of MTAC, which by the way is the leveling is determined with pretty specific parameters, and it's going to be a lot more advanced than, say, your method book leveling, okay? Then you need to know your A major 2 and 3 octave scales, E flat major and B flat major, 2 octave scales with the 8th notes, 3 octave scales with triplets, up and down, some contrary motion scales also, beginning specifically on D, and so what I'm getting at is that these are very particular key requirements that you need to prepare for when you're doing CM. And then they give you recommended ones that you ought to know but are not required. And so what I like to do as a teacher is really push my students to also do the optional scales, arpeggios, and so on. Not just the ones that are required in the table, but the ones listed below as well. So you have your scales, tempi listed there, chord progressions, chords they should know, broken triads, roots, inversions, etc. And then theory requirements, be able to write elements, recognize them individually, recognize them in musical excerpts. So there's a little bit of, written, reading, writing, and the tiniest bit of ear training in there. But compared to the Royal Conservatory of Music and ABRSM, I'd say that there's not nearly as much just listening happening in these MTAC exams, so something to keep in mind. As far as the repertoire requirements go, I think out of all 3 syllabi, the MTAC is the one that allows you the most leeway with what you can select. You can choose from Baroque, Classical, Romantic, 20th century, with a little bit more liberty. If something that you like to play is not included in that syllabus, you could probably bring it to the CM evaluation and still pass with flying colors if it's like an exemplary work that displays that you're skilled in performing all the different things that are listed in your level that ought to be known and performed. So that's the MTAC.
That's interesting, because one of my biggest hesitations about, the syllabi is being restricted. on what I can teach, right? And the diversity. I know that these lists have become much more diverse in recent years, which is, I applaud that. In the past, the lack of diversity from underrepresented groups has always bothered me.
Exactly. And we talked about this in my graduate seminar in pedagogy as well. Like one of the cool things about the MTAC syllabus is that you can decide. And one of the pitfalls of the MTAC syllabus is that you can decide. And so with the RCM, including a lot more composers, a lot more women composers and a lot more composers of color these days, I think it's a good step in this direction of opening our musical world up to just more than just the usual Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Haydn, Handel, etc. But I don't know. Those are the pros and cons that make it hard for me to select which one syllabus we could gravitate toward. And that's why I kind of like to pick and choose and take a little bit from multiple of these. Okay.
How do you pick and choose? Don't you have to have it like pick and choose? Do you use these just as a guide for your students, or do you put your students with the exams?
Right. I don't prepare them for exams. I just pick and choose from the materials.
Okay, so you just kind of use this as a guide on where your students should be.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have the freedom to decide whatever repertoire we like, but the repertoire lists, particularly from the RCM, pretty cool stuff, So, yeah. And as far as the theory and oral skills go, I think it's helpful to look to these syllabi for some guidance. For the Royal Conservatory of Music, based in the UK, but widely studied throughout the world, there's a lot more in the way of musicianship. For example, let's say you're in level 2 RCM. Oh, sorry, let's go with level 1. Just go back to basics. You have to clap back rhythms that are played by an examiner twice, very specific. You have to identify intervals by ear that the examiner has played once, such as minor third, major third. Okay.
At level 1?
At level 1, yeah. So it's pretty.
Is there a preparatory? Is there a preparatory level for RCM?
Yes. So let me scroll back up. There's preparatory A and preparatory B. So you got to go through that first.
Okay, I was going to say.
Only then will you be able to do. Yeah, so it's prep A, prep B, then level 1. And because we're talking about repertoire levels, So the Masterwork Classic Book 1 or the Keats-Snell Book 1, that's going to be more advanced stuff than what the first year or two of the average student would go through, right? First, they have to go through the prep level of repertoire, and that's how it is with this syllabus too.
Do you use the ear training guidelines from RCM? Are you doing major and minor thirds with your piano students that have been with you for a year or two?
I like to just teach them the intervals, all of the major and perfect intervals before getting into the difference between a major third and a minor third. But yeah, some do better than others at that stage. Can you tell the difference between a major second and a perfect fifth? Can you tell the difference between a major second and a major third? These are the kinds of questions that I would typically ask, say, a fourth grader who's been with me for a couple of years.
Yeah, that seems way more, I don't want to say appropriate, but for what I'm what I expect of my students in terms of oral training. That seems much more reasonable than major versus minor thirds.
Yeah, it's very specific. So it's like you're if you are preparing your student for an RCM exam, I think these these things that they're being tested on are pretty specific, and it makes me question, are these arbitrary decisions that the authors of the syllabus made, or is there a rhyme and reason to it? I don't really know looking at
Yeah. I mean, knowing the difference between a major and a minor third, with a student that's been with me for 2 years, I wouldn't even probably be broaching the theory on a major versus a minor third, because that just seems so that seems so specific. And the applications for that in terms of what a student is playing just seem very limited, right? Because either you have to count with half steps, or you have to go all the way through scale theory for all 12 notes in order to be able to tell if major, minor, third. And that's one of the things I've also been worried about is like teaching to the test, like school teachers complain about with their standardized tests. Like why, I don't know if I'd want to spend the time teaching a major and minor third to a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old to try to get them to pass the test.
Right. So these are the kind of the teaching philosophy questions that you have to ask yourself. How much of this is arbitrary? How much of this is truly going to help the student? I think that if you bring association, like emotional association, into your teaching of the third in particular, it doesn't have to be too challenging for the student to get it. Do, mi, okay, happy. Do, what is
May.
it? Re, re.
May. Yeah.
Yay, thank you.
Can I go off on a side tangent?
Mm-hmm.
I have a student, an adult student. She was born in China, and I asked her, because we're going over some scale theory, I asked her if she associates minor with sad, and she doesn't. She says it sounds happy to her.
Oh, from where?
China.
Okay.
And I thought that was fascinating, because we, in the Western world, we do so heavily associate those with major and minor, happy and sad. And I just think it's so interesting that the type of music she grew up with did not build that same kind of association with her. But that's my tangents over. Go back to your topic.
Oh no, anytime I teach the difference between major and minor too, I make very sure to tell the student, hey, that's just how we interpret it here in the West. It's not the be all end all of thinking about these two contrasting modes, but you kind of have to do an age appropriate explanation, just depending,
Right.
on their age. Okay, well, moving on to repertoire, things like that, for the RCM syllabus, let's see what they give. They give you 3 lists for every single level. There's a list A, Baroque and classical repertoire, a list B, Romantic and 20th, 21st century, and then the list C includes inventions. This is pretty interesting because every single level has this list A, list B, list C, and it's the same categories that I described for each. List A is always Baroque, list B is always classical. That's not true. I take that back. It depends on what level, but usually by the time you're in list C, you're either in some kind of invention or you're in 20th and 21st century repertoire.
When you say invention, are you referring to the Baroque inventions?
It could be Baroque, but it doesn't have to be, and that's the really interesting thing. If we go to, say, list C from level 2, we also have inventions by Bela Bartok, the Microcosmos, lots of composers from the 20th and 21st centuries here. In fact, in level 2, list C doesn't contain a single invention by Bach.
Am I, when we say invention, are we referring to the two-part Baroque form?
Yeah. I mean, really, an invention is anything that's contrapuntal, right? With a couple of voices. So
does Lisp C go off towards fugues and three-part sinfonias in the later levels?
The interesting thing is that the inventions list dies off in the later levels. So a lot of the inventions in the earlier levels are not even your typical Bach invention. Fascinating. And I just noticed that. Yeah. And then list C in the later levels is just 20th century works, period. And Romantic and 21st century also.
Am I correct in, I seem to remember that list C is RCMs where most of RCM's diversity comes from?
Yeah, that's what it seems like over here. And there are a lot of Slavic composers, and then later, in level 5, etc., you start to see actually, all these levels, you have technical requirements that include playing an etude. So that's something to keep in mind too. You got to know an etude. You got to do a technical test that includes the formula pattern scale. This is kind of what I wanted to talk about too. I think it's helpful to put the formula pattern scale on a syllabus and on an exam because it showcases your ability to quickly transition from parallel motion to contrary and back. And we also have arpeggios and dominant seventh chords. So the RCM syllabus is my personal favorite, even more than the MTAC for this reason. It's just so thorough when it comes to all of the musicianship you need, all of the arpeggio proficiency, and all the theory that's out there, plus the technique with the formula pattern scales and so on.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think that having the ear training, the oral skills be so integrated is useful, because I think that's definitely my weak point as a teacher is oral skills. I struggle to find a way to integrate it into the lesson in a way that, I mean, when we do theory, that theory can then be integrated back into our pieces, right, into our practice. We can do form, we can do harmonic analysis, etc. But with the oral skills, the time that my students invest in that, I'm never able to connect it back.
Well, yeah, it's not easy, and it takes a lot of time and patience. And the fact that it can be so challenging, during the lesson makes me think, well, maybe that's something that we can turn to a learning app for, learning app.
There's an app I use. It's called Functional Ear Trainer. It's what got me through my musicianship classes in college. I was awful at it. I was terrible. I'm still not the greatest. But and that's the thing. I have some of my students set up on that app, and they go through the levels. They are getting better with their musicianship. But then, like, I don't have a way to show them this time is worth anything, right? Like, sure, they're going up in the levels. They're able to do that activity better. But like, should I be doing learning pieces by ear? That's not something that I really know how to do. I mean, I'm not sure how to, this is off topic again, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure how to make oral skills relevant to my students.
Well, I mean, there's different kinds of oral skill proficiency, right? There's the rhythm. You can do clap back. You could dive into the world of teaching through solfege if you're if you're really intentional about it. You could sing, you know, a lot of students like to sing when they learn, even if not everyone does.
You know, I mean, do you use your oral skills?
All the time, every single day. I would not be able to function without them. I think my ability to instantly recognize an interval or a chord is probably what I use most in my teaching. That way, I can listen to a student with my eyes closed, which I sometimes like to do, just so I can focus on my sense of hearing and really pick out like what they might be needing to work on. Although I do check to make sure they have the right posture and all, of course.
Right, of course.
The time. But I like to tune into my hearing, and I couldn't do that without having been tested in oral skills by the MTNA.
Yeah. I mean, as a teacher, absolutely, those oral skills are invaluable. What about in your own private practice for your own music that you're learning?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine getting anywhere without them personally. Yeah. I mean, when I compose, what I audiate in my mind, I'm able to write it down on paper because of oral skills. It's all connected for me. If anything, my visual idea of music was lacking for years, and so oral skills provided me with the opportunity to use my theory knowledge to then transmit what I've heard onto paper.
Gotcha. I'll let you get back to your topic.
Oh, sure. Well, with that, we go to the Associated Board of Royal Schools of Music, or ABRSM. And I'd say out of all the different syllabi, the ABRSM is the one that features the most diverse composers and the most diverse musical styles. So if you're looking for repertoire, I would highly recommend looking into the repertoire provided by the ABRSM. Nothing too exciting when it comes to their theory and technique, but there is sight reading. There's more sight reading in the ABRSM, I think, than in the other tests. There's more of an emphasis on sight reading. And then oral tests are given by the examiner. So yeah, if your student is interested in learning jazz, blues, etc., world music, I would say look to the ABRSM for repertoire ideas. But of course, it also has a repertoire from the typical Baroque, classical, and Romantic and 20th century composers also.
Gotcha. So, you don't personally do the tests, though, right?
Nah, but every once in a while, I'll try to make up my own little quizzes inspired by things like this. Say that a student of mine is learning how to play broken triads. I'll have them do, do, mi, so, do, so, do, mi, etc. Do, mi, so, like that with the right hand, then the left, then maybe do it in all the different keys that they know how to do. Same with the seventh chords, with their hands.
Right. So, is this common? Because whenever I hear people talking about like certificate of merit or any of these other syllabi, they are always singing the praise of the tests and not so many parents, but some parents are very focused. I've noticed that my parents from China, the parents of my Asian students, they say that they have a very strong they have music tests in China, and they are very much into the idea of their child getting the levels and the certifications, and some of them are convinced that it helps them get into music school later, and I generally say that, the test is not going to having a level 10 certification is not going to sway the audition board. They're going to want to know what your child can play, right? So if your child plays well, then the level 10 certification means nothing. And if they don't play well, then the level 10 certification still doesn't mean anything in that context.
Yeah, I think it could have something to do with the fact that, this is a standardized process that's tried and true. And if teachers may overlook certain things that need to be taught in order for the student to get that well-rounded education, then the syllabi are there to pick up the slack, and so are the examinations. So it's like proof and reassurance to the parent that their student is on track at something. So I can definitely be sympathetic to that. And I myself went through jumping through all those hoops, and I would say I came out stronger for it, but it's definitely not for everyone. I think it's especially useful for kind of lazy, talented students who need that extra push to really get motivated to learn their stuff.
Right.
But yeah, for those who do not do well under pressure, there are other approaches out there and other opportunities out there.
You wouldn't say that it's a one size fits all then?
No, I wouldn't. And I think that it's up to the teacher to have some common sense, no matter what is going on with the certification process. It all goes back to, for me, CPE Box manifesto on wow, my phone's about to die. Hang on, let me put my charger in. About the difference between someone who technically gets all of the pitches right and someone who really plays with feeling. I mean, it's like night and day. I would rather have a student who made their mistakes and whatever the case and still came away with everything with a sliver of musicianship, as opposed to someone who could get everything technically right, but something is missing in the performance, the essence of maybe what the performance is missing.
Yeah. So would you say that I should? Would you say that I should start doing the tests? Because I've had people tell me that before, and I'm curious to see. Because you said that this was interesting enough to choose a topic. So you wouldn't say that I should do the tests?
No. I mean, who am I? I don't even do the tests. Maybe that will change in the future, but who am I to tell you that you should look into it if I'm not even doing it myself?
Right. I think that's so interesting, because I've never considered just using them as a guide for my own, for myself. I've always associated these very much with the tests, and I don't like the idea. And most of our students are not going to become musicians. Like they're not going to go to music school. Okay, let me rephrase. All of our students are musicians. Most of them are not going to become professional musicians. Most of them are not going to go to music school, right? Mm-hmm. And I've struggled in the past with this idea of how much do I focus on, like how much do I prepare my students for the possibility that they will become a professional musician versus how much should I treat these students like they're just here to have fun, right? How do I find that balance, right? Because a 14-year-old may, who knows what they're going to be? An 8-year-old, who knows what they're going to be, right? So like, is it right to treat these students like they're going to become professional musicians and prepare them like that? Or is it right to treat them like they're just here to have fun? Or should I be making a judgment? And that feels weird too. I'm judging whether this 12-year-old is going to become a professional musician and then changing what I teach them accordingly. So I've always struggled with this idea that, most of these kids are not going to ever be in a situation where their playing has consequences, right? Where their playing has tangible consequences like a grade or a job or whatever, right? And these tests are a situation where they could potentially be set up to not succeed at piano. And I'm very hesitant to put my students in that position when most of them are never going to need to be in that position.
Yeah, you know, if it came down to it and I started doing it, I would say I would only enter my student for one of these exams if I just knew that they
Right.
were prepared and they were going to pass with flying colors no matter what. It's something that their parents can stick on the fridge, Hey, we're proud of you, honey. You passed this exam. Doesn't necessarily have implications for their career. No. But it could be a source of a little confidence boost in the piano lesson arena. But only if I feel like they're gonna just crush it.
Right. Yeah. So big takeaways here. I think that even if you are hesitant about using these syllabuses and using them, doing the tests, right? Because some of these you have to join professional organizations to be involved with, and there's hoops that as a teacher you have to jump through. Even if you are hesitant about that element, it sounds like you think these syllabi are a valuable tool to just measure your students by, just internally, and make sure that you're not creating a blind spot that they'll suffer from later in life.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a way for me to kind of see if I'm on track as a teacher, see how I'm measuring up as an educator, see if there's anything I've missed, anything I didn't consider,
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Any last words here?
Well, I hope all of you are having a nice time, and thanks for tuning in.
Yes, we will see you next week. Thanks for listening.